Join me in my tent on this rainy night. I have stories to tell. They're dark and sometimes frightening, and they're always true. Tonight, I'm going to tell you about a murder that was never meant to be heard, but was captured anyway. This story begins in Maryland, where nights are usually still and violence feels distant until suddenly it isn't. On Saturday, November the 14th, 1998, 35-year-old Sara Raras and her best friend, Laura, hung out together at a local clothing store in Howard County, Maryland. The store was bright and warm, music playing softly overhead, the steady shuffle of hangers and quiet conversations filling the space. Sara needed some retail therapy, not to buy any clothes, but to distract herself from the stress of separating from her husband, Lorenzo. On this weekend, in a cold November, her estranged husband, Lorenzo, had custody of their 1-year-old son, and Sara hated every minute she was apart from her baby. The absence followed her, a dull ache in her chest, a constant awareness of what wasn't there. Sara and her husband were in the middle of a fraught divorce and custody battle for their son. It kept Sara awake at night and made her stomach churn during the day. Her son was her life. Lorenzo wanted to take him away. Just then, her friend Laura pointed to a dress and asked Sara what she thought. Sara forced herself to join in. The muscles in her face moved as she smiled, but the feeling didn't reach her eyes. She could not shake off the feeling of dread welling up inside her. She walked around the store, fingers brushing fabric, eyes scanning racks as background music played, but she just couldn't shake herself out of her bad mood, which was so unlike her. She thought she'd had the perfect life up until about a year ago. She had a good job, working as a statistician for the National Security Agency, the NSA. She was an analytical person and used to solve information security issues for multiple federal agencies. Her gift of understanding mathematics came into good use in her job, but she had a creative side too. Sara was a writer, working on her first novel, a murder mystery, about a talented statistician who also solved crimes. Like many writers, she used her personal experiences to breathe life into her characters. Late nights tapping at the keyboard, notes scribbled in margins, ideas quietly taking shape. She and her husband, Lorenzo, had bought her dream house in a suburban neighborhood, a picture postcard property, streets lined with manicured lawns, white picket fences, a safe place to raise a family, the calm, curated look of a place where nothing bad was supposed to happen. But soon after her son was born, things at home began to fall apart. Lorenzo didn't do his share of the childcare. In fact, he seemed disinterested in anything childcare related that took up his time. For Sara, resentment set in. Sleepless nights combined with juggling her important government job with taking care of a newborn baby all on her own. The days blurred together, work, beating schedules, broken sleep. Sara felt isolated. Her family lived about 1,000 miles away in Alabama, too far away to help. But her mother-in-law, Lorenzo's mother, was on hand, babysitting whenever she could. helping Sara with caring for the home and cooking for her son. But her time was limited, as Sara's mother-in-law worked full-time at a retirement home. Sara tried to talk to her husband. She begged Lorenzo for his help, but he remained stuck in his ways. His old-fashioned views placing their son's care firmly on the mother's shoulders. A year later, Sara had had enough, so she filed for divorce. However, Lorenzo didn't want to let his wife have her own way. And all of a sudden, he wanted to be with their child all the time. He made divorce and custody proceedings as difficult as possible, which is why Sara had been so stressed. Back in the store, Laura asked Sara if she saw anything that she liked, but Sara's legs were tired from walking around for so long, and her spirits were low. She thanked her friend, apologized for not being better company. Laura gave her friend a hug and said she totally understood. The sun was already lowering as they headed for their cars. It cast long shadows across the pavement, the day quietly slipping away. A little later that night, Sara was home alone. Seeking comfort in her writing, she turned on her laptop and sat in her family room. The house creaked as it settled around her. Lights glowed softly. The hum of electricity ran quietly through the walls. She began working on her mystery novel, immersing herself in her fictional world. Her shoulders began to relax as she worked on her characters, piecing together plot twists. The screen cast a pale light across her hands as she typed, keys clicking steadily, the rhythm familiar and comforting. Then, at around 8:45 p.m., she lifted her head from her laptop, finger stilling over the keyboard as she heard something in the house. A sound that didn't belong. She stemmed her breath, heart beating a little harder. The house seemed to listen with her. Silence was returned. Still feeling unsettled, she lay her laptop down and slowly crept down the hallway toward her bedroom. The carpet muffled her steps. The air felt cooler here. She crouched down by her bed, and there on the floor was the large metal skillet that she kept by her bed every night, because ever since she lived alone she'd had an uneasy feeling, and tonight it intensified. The skillet was a useful weapon, should she need it, so she crouched, listening, waiting. Then she wondered if she'd been imagining it all along. Perhaps her crime fiction had left her nerves raw and exposed. She dismissed the thought and left the room, leaving the skillet behind. She told herself she was just being paranoid. She walked down the hallway and returned to the family room. However, just moments later, the sound of shattering glass filled the air. A sharp crack, sudden, violent. There was an intruder, and they were entering her home. At 7:45 on the following night, Sara's friend Laura got home after being out for most of the day. Her thoughts were with Sara. She hadn't been herself. She was worried about her friend. Outside, the air had that autumn sharpness, cold and dry, the kind that follows you indoors. Laura rested her bag on the side. She glanced over at her answering machine and saw a light blinking in the stillness. A small, stubborn pulse of red in a room lit by ordinary kitchen light. She walked over and pressed the button, and as the message played, relaying that it had been sent at 8:56 p.m. the night before. At first, she couldn't make out the sound. Laura tilted her head. Was that somebody heavy breathing down the line? The speaker hissed softly, then a low, hollow sound like wind caught in a railway tunnel. And underneath it, a breath, too close, too present. A scream filled the air, making Laura cup her mouth with her hand. Then the message was filled with sobbing before it came to an abrupt end. A chill raced down Laura's spine, and for a second, she wondered if it was a missed dial. That would have made sense, or a prank call, perhaps. Then the automated voice gave Laura the option to dial the number of that caller back. Shocked by what she had just heard, Laura pressed the button to automatically return the call. Disbelieving, she listened as it went straight to her friend Sarah's voicemail. Laura's hands started shaking now that she knew it was Sara who had left this message. Her sense of urgency grew. She hung up, tried calling Sara again, hoping this time she would pick up. But again, it rang and rang, then went to voicemail. Laura didn't wait. Heart hammering, she hung up and immediately dialed 911. A few minutes later, a Howard County police officer pulled up in front of Sarah's house. He had been out on patrol nearby when he got the call to carry out a concern for welfare call. At this address, the street was quiet. Lights glowed inside the house. The officer lit from his car and approached the front door. But before he even reached it, he stalled, because one of the front windows had been smashed in. Splintered glass lay scattered across the ground. The window was fractured. Someone had broken in. He updated control of a potential burglary. This could have been a threat to life. He wasted no time, approached the front door and knocked. No response. He tried the doorknob, his senses on high alert. It was locked. Using a special tool, he forced open the door. He crept inside, quietly and with care. He was aware of the threat. He was ready to defend himself, because the person who broke in could still be present. The officer searched each room in the house, a quiet eeriness lingering in the air. Then he walked into the brightly lit family room, unprepared for what waited there. Backup was needed. He couldn't deal with this alone. It was close to 9 p.m. when Detective Nate Raig stepped out of his car. The quiet neighborhood had come alive as concerned neighbors watched from behind twitching curtains. Some stood on driveways, others pretended to walk their dogs. All eyes were on him as he approached the pale-faced officer to relay what he had seen. The onset of such brutal violence in such a quiet neighborhood had shaken him to the core. He listened, calm, steady, his years of experience coming to the forefront as he took control. This tall, steady man calmly told the officer to remain outside. Raig donned the protective clothing needed to enter an active crime scene, because that's what this was. Once inside the house, he went straight to the family room, and even with years of homicide work behind him, the scene suddenly stole his breath. The metallic smell of blood filled the officer's nostrils. A lingering vibration of violence set in. Blood was splattered in harsh red patterns dappling the ceiling, walls, and floor. Raig took in the scene. A woman in her 30s, stabbed and cut so often she had almost been dismembered. The violence was extreme, so frenzied it spoke of rage, a hatred so deep that the killer couldn't stop. A crime driven by something personal. Raig's eyes moved around the room. He noticed a bag nearby. Inside was a wallet, a driver's license. The victim was named Sara Raras. The blood had coagulated, then dried. Time had passed. Based on the voicemail Laura had received, Raig believed Sara had been dead since that call was made. He turned away from the scene, walked back outside, filled his lungs with fresh, cool air, then grounded himself. And the investigation began in earnest. Detective Raig spoke with the other officers and forensics technicians as they arrived. Red and blue lights washed over the houses on the street. The neighborhood, normally still, orderly, felt exposed now. Neighbors lingered on porches, arms folded, voices hushed. People who had gone to bed expecting another quiet night now watched police tape stretch across a house they passed every day. Raig instructed officers to begin canvassing. He hoped someone might have heard something, the sound of glass breaking, raised voices, anything at all. But this was a neighborhood unused to crime. Behind closed doors, televisions murmured. Dogs slept. No one had noticed. Inside the house, the forensic team began their work. Photographs were taken. Measurements were made. Gloved hands moving carefully through the space. Raig walked the room slowly, letting the scene speak as he made his assessment. The rest of the house expanded the story. Drawers pulled open, items displaced. A VCR was missing, yanked from its usual spot. Video cassette tapes lay scattered across the carpet. It looked like a burglary, but it didn't feel like one. Sarah's purse still sat on the coffee table, with cash inside. Her credit cards were untouched. Her laptop remained untouched. These had a higher value than the old VCR, which had been taken, most likely, for show. Even her jewelry was left behind. Raig had seen enough stage scenes to recognize the signs. This wasn't theft. It was distraction, an attempt to mislead investigating officers. And the brutality of the attack only reinforced that. This wasn't a random attack. This was personal. His forensic suit rustled from his movements as he scanned every inch of the floor. Bloody footprints were found leading from the family room toward one entry and exit point, the smashed window, out into the yard, into the darkness. They were photographed, measured, preserved. Crime scene officers worked hard to collect the blood that was crusted and dried into the floor. Every surface was tested. DNA samples taken from walls, floors, and from the victim, who was a crime scene in herself. There was plenty of evidence, although it seemed from the bloodied handprints that the victim had enough knowledge of forensics to wear gloves. What was missing was motive. Why would anyone inflict such violence on this woman? Was there a crazed killer on the loose, or was this much closer to home? Officers conducted house-to-house inquiries, speaking to shocked neighbors who hadn't even noticed Sarah's smashed window, let alone seen anything untoward. Later that night, as the house was sealed and officers maintained watch, Detective Raig drove to Laura's home. It was late. In a few hours, it would be morning. The street was quiet, nothing but the soft hum of crickets in the bushes. The lights were still on inside. Unable to sleep, Laura had not gone to bed. She opened the door with red eyes and a face already braced for bad news. Raig stepped inside and asked her to take a seat. Her legs felt weak, and she folded her hands in her lap. Tears sprung to her eyes before he spoke, as if already knowing the tragedy that had unfolded. She had heard it firsthand. Raig told her that he was sorry, his words low in the early hours as he relayed that police had found Sara dead. It was clear she had been murdered. That's when Laura broke. Her body folded inward as sobs took over. She repeated the same words again and again as denial took over. He was wrong. He had to be. They were all wrong. Because Sara, the woman who wouldn't hurt a fly, she couldn't be dead. Raig waited. He gave her time and waited for her sobs to subdue. He handed her a tissue. He always had a pack on hand for times like these. And when she finally looked up, her voice changed. It steadied. She told him they needed to go to Sara's estranged husband, Lorenzo, and place him under arrest for her best friend's murder. Immediately, the certainty in her voice caught Raig's attention. She explained the divorce and the custody battle, Sara's fear, how she'd been when they went clothes shopping, her concerns for her little boy, how Lorenzo hated her so much that he tried to take him away even though he didn't want him himself. Sara had told her she was terrified of Lorenzo. Then Laura dropped a bombshell. She said Lorenzo had threatened to kill Sara, that police had been called months earlier, that Sara slept with a metal skillet under her bed in case he returned. Raig listened carefully. These were claims he would have to verify, but they were specific, detailed, and delivered without hesitation. Laura told him where to find Lorenzo with his mother, a temporary abode. Raig remembered seeing the metal skillet and wondered why it had been in Sara's bedroom. Now he knew. The woman had been terrified. A piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Before he left, Raig asked Laura for the answering machine. She unplugged it and handed it to him. A vital piece of evidence. The plastic felt warm from the room, heavy with what it carried. Raig took it with him back into the night with a sudden sense of urgency, because now he had his answer. The question of motive had been solved. And he knew from years of policing that sometimes the people you need to fear the most are those closest to you, the ones aware of your every move. He reached the station and sensed building anticipation in the air. His colleagues had an update. Police records confirmed what Laura had said. Sara had reported threats, and Lorenzo had been removed from the home after threatening to kill her. A court order was still in place, preventing him from returning. Raig jumped into action and requested search warrants for Lorenzo, his car, and his mother's house where he was living. Officers were immediately dispatched to watch the property, quietly and discreetly as they waited for the search warrant to come through, just in case. The following morning, on 16th November, Lorenzo was stopped as he left the house to go to work, acting like it was a normal day when the mother of his child had been slaughtered in her home. He was taken to the station, and his car was impounded. His mother's house would be searched. Now the warrants had come through. Detective Raig delivered the news to Lorenzo's mother, Amelia. The small woman stood in her doorway. She was in her 60s, and it seemed had never faced violence like this before. Shock washed over her face as she struggled to comprehend the news, all the while holding Sara and Lorenzo's innocent and unknowing son. She said it couldn't be true. Her son Lorenzo had just seen Sara a couple of days before when he went to collect their little boy. She couldn't understand why anyone would want to hurt Sara, and the blood drained from her face as Ray showed her the police warrant. They entered the house and the search was thorough. Fingerprints were taken, items were seized. Amelia answered questions mechanically through her shock, caring for the little boy who was looking for his mum. Her other son, Mike, confirmed Lorenzo had been home the night Sara was killed. It seemed he had an alibi, but was it genuine? His answers were vague and uncertain. He seemed nervous in the presence of police. Family alibis weren't always solid. Raig noted it, and determined, he moved on. At the station, Lorenzo was interviewed. He cried, bent over, heaved as he portrayed himself as a man lost in grief. But when he stood up, there were no tears, no redness, no swelling or puffy eyes. His breathing was normal. He was in control. During questioning, his tone was flat, detached, at times almost smug. He denied everything, saying that he loved Sara, said he would never hurt her. His alibi mirrored his brother's. It didn't convince Raig, who was convinced that he'd found the culprit for the most heinous of crimes. But suspicion alone was not evidence. Lorenzo provided fingerprints, then DNA. Finally, and without admitting anything, he was released. Raig believed it was only temporary. He would uncover the truth for Sara, for her little boy, and for a justice system that he still believed in. Because without it, what was the point? Days passed. Frustrated, the detective waited for answers because his hunch was not supported by the law. Weeks later, the forensic DNA results came back. Raig's spirits plummeted as he read that it was not a match. Whoever committed the crime was not Lorenzo or Mike. Raig was baffled. Had he been wrong all this time? Had they been chasing the wrong man? But then he thought of Sara's funeral that he had attended, and how Lorenzo or his family hadn't shown up. He'd thought of his crocodile tears and knew that somehow he'd played a part in it. The case stalled. Raig replayed the voicemail over and over, hoping answers laid there. The technicians broke it down, then filtered noise and isolated sounds. After listening to it numerous times, they thought they heard Sara cry out a name. Mike. Detective Reddick sent 2 officers to pick up Lorenzo's younger brother, Mike. He interviewed him, delivering relentless questions as to his connection with the case. But Mike didn't fit the profile. Unlike his older brother, Mike was shy and introverted. He couldn't have been responsible for such a bloodthirsty act. He even grew upset when discussing Sara. He fully cooperated, stating he'd seen Lorenzo at home on the day in question before he went to work. But still, there was something, an undercurrent of knowing that the detective couldn't quite put his finger on. He dropped Mike off at work, but Mike was so overcome by emotion that he vomited on the ground. That's when Detective Rettig knew for sure. This family was hiding something, and he would do whatever it took to uncover it. Later, forensic analysis would rule Mike out. The case grew colder, but the detective would never forget that image of Sara lying there. Then, in January of the next year in a different county, a 19-year-old wearing a ski mask robbed the Baltimore McDonald's. He fired a gun, shot the manager after they opened the cash register. He was caught, then jailed. And inside his cell, he bragged. This teenager shared details about a murder, Sarah's murder. Detective Raig received the call. Hope stirred. Cautious at first, but real. He interviewed the young man. His name was Ardell Tickles, an unlikely name for someone wrapped up in violence, or perhaps that was the reason why. Perhaps Mr. Tickles was a name you grew up resenting when you were a little boy. The detective quickly realized that Ardell Tickles wasn't bluffing. Ardell knew of details that were never released to the public, the kind only the killer would know. The truth unfolded slowly and painfully as police pieced it together. On the day of the murder, the killer pulled on a pair of gloves. He carried a hunting knife. He was dressed in black, adrenaline rushing through his bloodstream. He crept towards Sarah's home. He ran down the yard, head down, hiding as he darted towards the house. Then he smashed the window, still unseen. His boots crunched on broken glass as he crept into the house, but Sarah had heard him. Panicked, she ran towards her phone, but the killer was quicker, just reaching her as she tried to dial 911. She hit the speed dial button instead. It connected to her friend. The killer's attack was non-stop. Extinction was their goal. They continued with force, raising their weapon again and again until the job was done. Covered in blood, they grabbed the VCR, then pulled out drawers to make it look like a burglary. They ran from the home, unseen, then sped into the night. But what followed was chilling. The next day, Tickles went to a retirement home where they worked and told the woman he worked with that the job was done. Amelia, Lorenzo's mother, had set the whole thing up. She'd hated Sarah with a passion. She wanted her gone. Because as far as Amelia was concerned, Sarah was never good enough for her son. She'd believed Amelia was having hookups with men she met online. There was no grounding to this, but still, her hatred grew. She interfered often, particularly when it came to parenting. In her eyes, Sarah was good for nothing. But when Sarah tried to gain full custody, Amelia formed a plan. $3,000. That was all it took for Ardell Tickles to agree to kill. He was the person she chose to end Sarah's life, someone she could trust, and for a while, it seemed that she'd got away with it. Until police discovered the bank withdrawal. At last, Detective Rettig found justice. During an interview, Amelia said she'd hired Tickles to scare her daughter-in-law, but she later contradicted herself as she stated that showing disrespect to a mother is death. There was no evidence that Lorenzo was involved, but Mike, he knew something that would haunt him forever. The realization that his mother hired a cold-blooded killer and showed no remorse. Ardell Tickles pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison, with a possibility of parole in 2024. Lorenzo's mother was found guilty also, sentenced to life, without parole. Some betrayals come from places no one expects, and that voicemail, it was real, but the name Mike was never spoken, just fear, breath, and the sound of a life ending. Some crimes leave scars, others leave recordings, and some stories, once heard, never truly fade. This has been Edward. Thank you for sitting with me. Keep warm, stay safe. And remember, not every voice is meant to be heard, but some refuse to be silenced. This has been based on a true story, but some details have been fictionalized to bring it to life, because victims of crime need a voice. If you like my stories, then each like and subscribe is like giving me a warm hug. Good night. Sleep well. Stay dry.